most folks need to do sort of slow it down a little bit, slow it down to speed up.
Welcome to Heart Inspired, the show dedicated to highlighting individuals in their pursuit of authentic leadership. We peel back the layers to uncover the roadblocks we all face, explore the actions we can take, and how to persevere toward the best version of ourselves. I'm your host, Michelle Delgado. In this series, my guests will share how they pushed through the pandemic and other challenges to turn their vision into a reality. Their stories will inspire you to leave self-doubt behind to focus on your goals. Ted Olson is the author of Feel Good About Selling, a book written to help people feel good about selling and to avoid the bad habits that hurt sales. He has trained thousands of salespeople from all different backgrounds and industries. He uses his sales experience to help individuals and organizations with sales, sales enablement, sales training, demand generation, and marketing. He's built sales teams that have broken every record at their respective companies. He's created a unique sales framework methodology called PEP, which stands for Positioning, Exploring, and Presenting. PEP offers a flexible approach based on core selling principles for anyone in sales, whether they like selling or not. When not at work, Ted practices martial arts and homeschools his 4 kids with his wife, Nicole. They have 2 dogs, Oatmeal and Honeybee, and a guinea pig, Pinball. Please welcome my guest today, Ted Olson. Welcome, Ted. It's so nice to have you here on the show.
Glad to be here, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we've had a couple of conversations over human behavior and people, great resignation and sales and all these things. You've given me some great tips throughout our time that we've known each other on social media posts and selling and everything else. And so I really want to dig deep and find out what your secret sauce is and how you approach selling. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up with the position you are in today as being an author and everything else.
So briefly, I have a pretty eclectic background. So I have like a degree in theology. I was a certified professional auto mechanic. I have 20 years of digital consulting. Like I can build websites and write sales copy and all these like weird things that are sort of hard to find that trajectory. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely unique.
Yeah. So it's funny because here's the trajectory in 3 because
Sure.
I put pretty much everything in 3s. I made a transition from a 15-year sales career into the internet and starting to sell things online.
Okay.
And from there, studying human behavior, that got me into sort of the world of psychometrics and understanding how people think and work, which of course is directly related to sales and marketing and sales enablement, all things that I'm passionate about. So it actually came from auto repair because my first job fixing cars was actually talking to the customers. I had to do discovery with them. I had to figure out root cause analysis, like what's really happening. When are you hearing that noise, right? And then I had to sell them and I had to upsell them. And I had to do proposals and all the numbers and everything. So it was really solid ground for me to build where I am today.
Wow, that's a great foundation.
Yeah.
So when it comes to selling, what are some of the emotions you feel when you're doing it, when you're on and it's going well?
Certainly, wow, that's a big one. I could go in so many directions. Let me try and scope it down. So I would say my first thought was be human, be real. Like don't try to. There's a lot of sales systems out there and they're good. The problem with them though is many are now outdated and they're actually incorporate sales tactics versus just trying to help somebody. So the motion that I'm always thinking about is how can I help you solve your problem?
Yeah.
And that is the honor and the privilege of sales is to help somebody get from a place where they don't want to be to where they want to be. And
Yeah.
I think of a professional salesperson as a trusted advisor, someone who can help you make a decision that will have a positive impact on your life.
And so when you're a trusted advisor and you think the conversation's going well, you're not selling them, you're building that rapport, you're building that trust, and you're listening to their pain points, if you will. Um, how long would you say that cycle is for you, where you can
Yeah,
get to the point where they really trust you and they're starting to open up? Because sometimes if you don't know somebody, they're a little guarded, maybe. They
yeah,
have to understand that you're the right person to talk to.
yeah. I spend a lot of time coaching salespeople, consultants, entrepreneurs to create a safe space. So you need to be someone who is safe. And
Yeah.
that is not taught in sales. What you're taught is really tactics. And tactics are just, they're tricks or they're psychological tricks. And anytime I hear the word tactic, a sort of little red flag goes up for me,
Yeah.
because people don't like to be, people don't like that. They can feel it, they can sense it.
Yeah.
So I think you really need to spend time on what does it mean to be real, right? To be human. What
Yeah.
does it mean to actually actively listen to someone? But even before that, to create that space where they feel um, free to speak their mind and not guarded. So how do you help them lower that guard? And there's all kinds of ways that you can do that. You can do that with empathy. You can do that with story. You can do that with just being human. You can do it with a joke.
Yeah.
But I think it needs to be done in the service of your prospect to help them move forward, not as a way to get something. That's the difference. Intent, your intent matters. And I think most people are taught to get things from their prospects. And I think that's not our job. Our job is to
Hmm.
actually help them get to where they want to go.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
interesting. So when you are in your zone, if you will, and you're building that trust in that conversation, um, in your experience, can you tell us something that has happened where all of a sudden, oops, something went south and it's not going well? And what's happening there? What could it have been?
I think assumptions and what I'd call trigger words and trigger phrases, where I've said something, I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that, right? Because what I did is I knocked the prospect on their heels. I put
Okay.
them on the defensive.
Yeah.
And the term that they use in psychology is called psychological reactance. And psychological reactance is a fancy term that was, the guy's name is Brehm.
Okay.
And he developed this theory, and we all know it. It's the theory of when you ask your kid to go to bed, they say no. But if you ask them, hey, do you want to go to bed? Do you want mommy to put you to bed or daddy to put you to bed? Well, that's a different question, right? Now they have a
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
So avoiding psychological reactance is something I spend a lot of times helping people do, because I've triggered it a lot in my career. And it wasn't until one of my mentors pointed it out, and I'm like, oh, you're so right.
Yeah.
So certain words like issues, pain, challenges, you don't, those are words that can actually make people feel defensive. And all you need to do is change it to help me understand your situation. What's happening at ABC Corporation?
Yeah.
Can you unpack your context a little bit better for me? Right?
That's great.
Those are safer words that
Yeah.
don't trigger that psychological reactance, which, by the way, is the feeling of being trapped in a corner, right? So
Yeah.
picture yourself being pinned in a corner by a bully. And
Yeah.
what are you going to do? You have a desire to lash out. You're like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
That's the reactance part. And so what they do is a prospect will push right back on you. And
Yeah.
oftentimes you'll never even hear it. It sounds like this. Um, we'll get back to you.
Oh, yes.
That's what it sounds like. We'll follow up.
And then it's crickets.
Exactly. Crickets. Yeah. Because you've just been ghosted. Yeah.
Note to self.
Yeah.
So when you are in that, when you feel that, or when that's happened, any tips that you can offer, anything that you've done where you've actually recovered from that and rebuilt the trust, or is it dead in the water?
No, I think I think that we as humans make lots of mistakes, and there's lots of sort of accepted norms in conversations. So
Yep.
I remember the largest deal I ever closed. My VP of sales was on the call listening in the background, and he made a note. He was making notes, like bullet point notes, just to help me improve. He made 51 points.
Was he listening?
Yeah.
Because to make 51 points, you have to be writing, and you can't be writing and listening.
If you met this particular VP of sales, you would know. Oh, he could pull that off.
Oh, okay.
And
That's a talent.
yeah, 51 points, and every single one was, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have said it that way. I should have done it like this. I mean, I learned a ton from that, but the deal still closed because regardless of my mistakes, I was able to help that prospect get to where they wanted to go.
Yeah.
So I think we don't want to worry too much about it, but we don't want to create objections. Like, you're going to get objections, but let's make sure it's one you didn't create by either being too aggressive, too assertive, too assumptive.
Yeah.
So the way that I correct it when I catch myself is I'll say something like if I say like something I don't like, does that make sense? Like, I hate when I say that because it's such a lame question.
Yeah.
I'll cover it and I'll say, does that make sense? Or am I way out in left field? And that way I've created the safe space for them to correct me. I always
Yeah.
want to keep myself in that vulnerable position, so that my prospect feels safe. That's who needs to feel comfortable during the conversation, because one of your first points was many people are guarded, especially now,
Yeah.
right? So we really need to teach people and transform from being salesy to trusted advisory.
Yeah.
I'm making
So
words up now.
salesy sounds great to me. Um, what are some of other than being those tactic works, what are some other big no's that you can share that you've learned throughout your years of selling and have made adjustments to? What are some of the big no-nos when it comes to selling?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest no-nos is so selling is very much a process, and that process can take seconds in an internet transaction, or it can be a year-long, 2-year-long sales cycle.
Yes.
And what most often happens is what I call happy ears. So a prospect shows you some interest. And what do? You get all excited. Oh, I've got a prospect. And what you do is you jump all the way to your solution and you start expounding on how awesome you are, your product is, your company. And that is no longer resonating. You've just lost. You might get some nods like, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Right? But you haven't taken the time to do two big things. One is understand what the heck matters to them, and two,
Yes.
provide some real value. So
Yeah.
real value coming in as that trusted advisor, providing insights into their business, helping them to see more clearly, prioritize. Like, a lot of people talk about in sales, you've got to get to the pain. You've got to get to the pain. Actually, you've got to get to what matters to them. So a smart business person might realize they have 5 different fires at any different time. But just because you can solve one of their fires, it may not necessarily be that important, or it may be
Right. May not
something.
be at the top of their priority list.
Exactly. So how can you tie it back to the larger business strategy,
Right.
in order to help that cause, because you're much more likely to do what matters to them. So what matters to them and providing value are usually missing in most
Yeah.
sales conversations. Most salespeople get a little bit of interest, stay at the surface. They've got these happy ears. Oh, they want to buy our stuff.
Right. Right.
And then they end up getting ghosted.
Yeah.
Or we'll let you know,
Right.
or they set themselves up for a dog and pony show, right? They don't sell the business conversation. Let's set up some time to see if there's a there, to see if we can even help. I have no idea. Let's talk.
Yeah, that's
Right.
so important because it is a two-way relationship. And so you don't want to be selling because they have this need and maybe that's not the right fit for you. So you want to make sure it makes sense for both parties.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And do you find that, um, I've taken a couple of workshops here and there and, born seller, we're selling ourselves all the time, right? In some capacity. Do you find that the technique of recapping, is this what I understood, is helpful? And if so, do you find that in your experience, they come up with maybe something else that you may have missed or you didn't hear that is they're looking for a solution for?
Yeah, absolutely. I forget who coined the phrase. Might have been Sandler or something, but it's called the doorknob question.
Oh,
It's like,
interesting.
you're sort of ending the conversation, or you're wrapping up one section of the conversation, and a question like, hey, is there anything else that
Yeah,
it's on your mind that maybe you just want to get off your chest? And
yeah.
sometimes they just dump, right? Because if you've created that safe space
Right.
and that rapport, there's a lot of business folks out there that need to talk. They're going through some really hard times. We're in a world of constant disruption, change, and it's really hard right now on so many fronts. But you said specifically the recap, and I love the recap. So the recap needs to be part of your discovery. So after you go through discovery, and I use a very specific framework when I go through my discovery, and at the end of that, I want to stop and ask for permission to say, hey, can I give it back to you to make sure that I'm tracking with you? And then I want to put them in the position to correct me. So I'll say something like, and you tell me what I missed,
Yeah.
right? So then I give them,
Great.
I'll repeat back what I heard at a high level. It only
Mm-hmm.
takes about 30 to 60 seconds. And I'll say, did I get that right? What did I miss? And when you nail it, you know it, because they're like, no, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's everything that's happening.
Yeah. And I think if you nail it, then they really, that gives you a couple extra points on the trust and that you are listening intently to them because
Yes,
you've paid attention to their needs. Yeah,
for sure.
that's good stuff.
And by the
Um,
way, there's a more advanced motion where you can actually do that recap on the front end. I call it, in my book, I call it rapid discovery. So there are certain scenarios that are well known in specific industries and niches. So like deep dive discovery isn't necessary. It's sort of like, I was talking about this on with another sales leader, and something like turnover in retail sales, or even turnover in retail, it's a known problem, right? You still need to figure out what the specifics are for that particular organization, but you can also come in and just help them completely rethink it,
how
right?
so? Tell us more.
So it would sound like this. It would be, hey, Michelle, I know you've been with, ABC Retail Corp for 10 years now. You've risen in the ranks, and we all know, turnover is a costly, situation for many organizations. And here's what most do. 1, 2, 3. I'm here to tell you that that's helpful, but it's not going to actually move the needle. Here's a different
Mm,
way to think about it. Boom, 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 boom. And
mm,
now they're like, oh, tell me more,
right.
right? But you want to give it back to them and say, how does this land with you? Does this seem like it could be helpful in your context, et cetera? And it's a way of sort of, I hate to use the word hijacking, but it's a way of hijacking discovery to getting right down to the root. So you're right at the root and rolling around in that, helping them rethink their situation versus the same old, like long drawn out process of questions, which might frustrate them.
Yeah.
But again, you need to be careful using that. It's a technique that I talk about in my book. So it's there if you want to try it.
Oh, well,
If it works for your context. But
yeah.
most folks need to do sort of slow it down a little bit
Mhm.
Slow it down to speed up.
Yeah. Oh, very
Yeah.
good. Very good advice. And so you mentioned something very interesting, and I know we've talked about this before, is, when you're first meeting with them, you want to make sure that you're still aligned with what their time is, their goals, what the expectations are of that conversation. So give us a little bit about how you would start that conversation once you've established that you're going to talk to this person about your solutions. So you're just meeting for the first time after you've kind of done a little bit of discovery, they've set up the
Mhm.
meeting with you. How do you approach that to just immediately start to build that rapport?
Yeah, I do 4 things, and it's a very simple framework. The first is the time check,
Yeah.
which is, hey, Michelle, thanks for carving out some time to chat. I have an hour booked on my calendar. Does that still work for you?
Mm,
That time check is the most basic setting of expectations. And what often happens is salespeople will be like, "Oh, thank you so much for talking to me. We probably won't need the whole hour." And there, it's just like this subservience, and like that's not. So sales is about leadership, right? This is not.
brilliant.
You have to actually help somebody get from A to B. You need to be a trusted guide. If you're there, sort of saying in that awkward subservient position, you've already lost.
Yeah.
Part 2 is the first thing I want to do, Michelle, is to learn to make sure I understand you and your situation by asking you some questions. Would that be okay?
Permission.
I call that permission to learn. So that's
Mm,
step 2. Step 3, everyone hates it. Everyone's afraid of it. It's where you're going to drop something different, but then give your prospect an out. So it might sound something like this. Michelle, obviously I'm in love with my product and services, but it may not be a fit for you. Would you be open to letting me know if it's not a fit at any time? Is that fair? Right? Because what I'm doing there is I want to sort of create some intrigue about my unique approach, my difference, but I want to give you an out because that's just honest. It may
yeah.
not be for you. And I think a lot of people have trouble with that. They're like, why would I ever want to give my prospect an out? And the reason they're thinking that is because they think they have to control everything. They don't. What they have to do is guide it.
Yeah.
So part of the journey, right? Sales is it's helping someone on a journey to make a positive change in their life, but you have to allow them to make that decision. You have to allow
Yeah.
them to own it. So I just want to just think of walking down the road. It's like, Michelle, this is where I'm heading, but it may not be where you want to go. And there's an exit right here. And
Right.
that's just honesty.
Yeah. It
In
just
the
gives more trust and more permission. It's awesome.
Yeah, so the 4-part framework creates a safe space. So 1, time; 2, permission to learn; 3, your unique difference and an out;
Hmm.
and then 4 is next steps and confirmation. So most sales conversations, as we talked about earlier, end with, "Oh, thanks, we'll let you know," right?
The
And
dreaded words.
yeah, and the reason that happens is because that expectation wasn't set on the front end. So
Hmm.
on the front end, it might sound something like this. Michelle, provided what we talk about today lands with you, could we carve out the last 5 minutes of our time together to work out a next step? Does that sound like a good use of our time? And what
Mm,
would you add?
that's great. That's really brilliant. I like that.
There's a 1, 2, 3 in there,
Yeah.
and you got to get them all in.
Yeah. And that's done at the beginning.
It's done at the beginning. It's the last
Yeah.
part of that 4-part framework to create that safe space.
Yeah.
Because there's no expectation. If what I talked about didn't land with you, you're free to walk. And I
Yeah.
want you to, because I don't want to be chasing you and wasting my time and energy.
Right.
I'd rather
Right.
be talking to people who want to use my services, right?
Yeah. Smart. Smart.
Yeah.
So, Ted, you are now what you can add to your resume, an author. Tell
Yes.
us about your book.
Yeah. So the book is Feel Good About Selling,
Okay.
because quite frankly, I looked around and saw that a lot of people don't feel good about selling. And as I thought about that, I'm like, they're absolutely right. They shouldn't
Yeah.
feel good about it. It's filled with high pressure, manipulation, sales tactics, toxic bravado. It's so much masculinity. It's like, come on. I mean, there's more like references to war in sports and sales than I think any other industry. And that's just not right, because what are we really talking about when it comes to sales? We're talking about helping people.
Yeah.
So how can you be killing it, right? How can you be crushing, right? These words are like, did you have a good conversation with someone? Did you actively listen? Did you practice empathy, right? Did you lead them well? Did you guide them well? Did you de-risk the process? That's what selling is. Where are you getting all this garbage nonsense?
Yeah.
So I think that, most sales books are written by salespeople for salespeople. I wrote a sales book for people that don't like salespeople. And that is really
that would be me.
Yeah, and it's not that I don't like salespeople personally.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
all of the tactics that have been handed down from generation to generation that just continue to perpetuate. I just sort of put my foot down and said, you actually don't need to do any of that. You can actually just be honest. And that's what I lay out in the book.
So how long did it take you to write this book? And I'm looking forward to, I saw that it dropped yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how long did it take you to come up with this masterpiece of yours?
Well, I appreciate you calling it a masterpiece. I am getting good feedback, but I want you to read it and you tell me.
Okay.
And if you don't like it, I want you to tell me why. But yeah, the feedback so far has been fantastic. And when the pandemic hit, I realized I had, with no commute, we went fully remote at the Predictive Index, best company ever.
Yeah.
And I had like an hour and a half, 2 hours extra per day. And so I did two things. One, I learned a martial art.
Oh.
Because I needed to get my exercise routine down. Like, okay, everything's changed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use a little bit of that time to learn a new discipline. And I don't like exercising, but I like martial arts. So I learned a new martial art. And number two, I spent an hour every morning writing. And I had an idea for a book probably 4 years ago.
Okay.
But it really didn't. Actually, it took me 2 years to write the book. Just a long story. Well, I'll keep it short. It took me 2 years to write the book. I probably could have done it in faster time, because as I was writing it, I'm working with my wife, who is a true author. She has like 5 books out there. She's a expert in the child advocacy space.
Wow.
And so she's reading it. She's like, honey, you've got 2 books here. Which one are you going to write? Right?
Oh.
You're trying to write 2 books at the same time. And I'm like, I know, it's frustrating the heck out of me. She's like, get rid of all this and just focus on the people who don't like salespeople, and you'll find it.
Oh, that's great.
As soon as that happened, I sort of was grinding for like a year.
Yeah.
And then when that happened, boom, the second year was just like, okay, I'm done. Let's just now it was like,
yeah,
get the cover design, all of that stuff.
Awesome. And so I love the title. Did your wife read the book already and have feedback other than when she first told you were writing 2 different books there?
Yeah, she shredded it. I mean, chapter by chapter, she shredded it. She's like, you've got chapter 11 should really be chapter 9. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, because some of it was stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And what I got really good at over the last 20 years is writing online.
Oh,
and
okay.
Writing blog posts, writing Twitter posts, writing LinkedIn posts. My wife's like, you're writing a book. You need to write it differently. I'm like, oh. So, you can put out a one-liner on Twitter and everyone kind of gets it.
Right.
But if you're going to explain the why behind that, you need to break it down.
Yeah.
And she showed me how to do that. So yeah, she's also an educator. So it made her, she's the ultimate editor.
You were very lucky to have that.
Very,
in your
very
family.
lucky. I would have had to hire somebody if I didn't have my wife.
So
actually, I did have to trade for that time. So she would be editing my book. I would be cooking dinner. So that was my.
Oh, well, that's not a bad trade, because you have to eat yourself and, feed your family. So there's that. So how has this journey helped you personally with your personal interactions, your selling techniques, the way you build relationships. Tell me about that.
One thing that surprised me, Michelle, was when I wrote the book, I was like, well, if I write a book, I'm not going to have anything else to say. And what I realized was, as soon as the book was done, and I had that off my plate.
Yeah.
It was like a Christmas tree. I just lit up, because while I cover, pretty comprehensively a very robust sales system in the book, it triggered so many new ideas that let me put it to you this way. Mathematically, I wrote more 6 months after I published my book than I did that's in the book.
So is that going to be the
it might be the sequel?
Yeah, I was just going to say the sequel.
Yeah, potentially. We'll see.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't expecting that. And I think that I also learned from, as a sales coach, someone who actually coaches people, I needed to get so can be a high level guy. I'm like, just do this. And people are like, I need the step by step. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah. And that really helped me to be prescriptive and a little more patient, because I'm not the most patient person. And the last one I'll say is moving from sort of judgment, sort of this is right or wrong, to observation.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Let's not put a value judgment on it. Let's just say, oh, I saw that you did this. Tell me why.
Yeah.
And in my coaching and consulting, that has been super helpful. So I'm still working on that, because I can be I have opinions, if you haven't figured that
out. Wait, in PI, are you a maverick?
In PI, I'm a strategist.
Oh, you're a strategist. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So it can be very direct, analytical, but my profile is rather unique, where I have a bit of a captain side, because my B is a little bit higher.
Okay.
So I like to work with people. I'm typically quick to connect, but I could be an analytical son of a gun pretty quickly, right? I get right down into, let's get to the point.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting how some of these patterns interchange or kind of blend. I'm a persuader, but I also love analytics. I love to know the why. I just told somebody yesterday, I'm like a dog with a bone. If I can't figure something out, I'm just going to keep at it. I may have to take a couple of days to come back to it, but absolutely, just dive in deep.
Yeah, die with a bone.
Yep. So you mentioned something about VET. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the VET framework actually came out of a number of conversations where people kept talking about how to handle objections, And I was like, no. I had my judgment hat on. No. None of that's not going to work. So here's the number one thing that most people don't understand about objections.
Okay.
There's two different dictionary definitions. There's I don't know what the description of an objection, which is the feeling of there's an emotional response to something, right? That's the number one definition. The number two is to object, right? To push back. And most people in sales use number two. It's like, wait a second. No, actually number one is the right one, because all objections, no matter how much they're shrouded in reason, are an emotional response. So if you don't respond to the emotion, and by the way, you don't respond to emotions by objecting to them. Stop and think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
If you have kids, a spouse, a loved one, if they're sharing a feeling and you object, what will happen?
Yeah.
They're going to object even more. So that is a way to help navigate the emotion. I actually despise some of the language in what do they use for objections in sales? Battle cards. Are we going to war?
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy town.
Yeah.
No, it's your job to actually help someone overcome their objection. You don't, and by the way, you don't fight with them,
right?
Because you're trying to help them.
Right.
It's okay to challenge them, but you don't need to do battle with them. And I think the language we use really impacts our approach. So vet helps sort of knock that approach over and say, number one, validate that feeling. That's vet. Number one, validate the feeling. To vet something, by the way, is to really get to the truth, right?
Right.
So let's vet it. And a vet sounds like, hey, that's a fair point. I don't care what their objection is, right? Oh, it's way too high. Price is too high. I don't have the time for this. Hey, that's a fair point. It is a fair point. And
Right.
that's just validating it. The next one is empathy. And empathy in a sales context can sound like, hey, I can appreciate why you might see it that way, right? Fair enough. I'm not rolling over. I'm just validating that
Right.
feeling.
And not apologizing for it either.
Exactly.
Appreciate versus I'm sorry you feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Very
sorry
good.
you feel that way is almost an accusation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you can say, hey, that's a fair point. I appreciate that. There, just boom, boom. There's vet, there's the validate, and there's the empathy. And the third one is teach. There's a number of T's in teach. And it might sound like this. Hey, it's a fair point. I appreciate that. Are you open to a different approach, or are you happy with what you have now?
Yeah.
Right. So remember, our role is to guide, and we
Mhm.
want to give them and show them the path. But we have to create that safe space, drop that guard, and we do
Yeah.
that by validating, by empathizing, and then by teaching. Are you open to a different way of thinking about this, or should we part ways here? Right? Are you open
Good stuff.
to a unique perspective, something a little different,
Yeah.
or should we stick with what we're doing? Right? People are going to be intrigued by that. So that helps them say no. What do you got?
Yeah.
Now there is another T in there, which is you may need to terminate. Right? It may not be. There may be like no there, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's better to find that out sooner versus later.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very insightful. And I like the fact that throughout all your different approaches in the beginning, is this okay? It's constant giving of permission for them to make choices for themselves. And then, are you open to another way of doing things? It's a choice. And so those two things going hand in hand throughout the conversation, it's just brilliant. It just helps build that relationship, because even if it's a no at the end, it may be no for now, but they're going to always remember you. And
Yeah,
it
they're
could
going to
be a
remember
yes
how you
later.
made them feel.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's really great. So Ted, this has been eye-opening for me. It's always great to have some refresher on selling and what we should be doing. Tell us about where you talked about that you do some consulting for sales, and you also have a blog, and then about your book. Where can people find about more information about you?
Yeah, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with you. Just mention Michelle's podcast so I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
The book is live on Amazon. It's entitled Feel Good About Selling. It should pop right up. There's a paperback and a Kindle version. And then you can go to the website feelgoodabouselling.com. So 3 places: LinkedIn, Amazon, and feelgoodabouselling.com. Any one of those, you'll find me.
That's awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. It's been really great. I'm sure that my audience will have had some notes to take on your process and your nuggets of wisdom. And it's been wonderful having you here, Ted. And I wish you all the best with your book. And I plan on picking it up very soon so I can give you my feedback. I'm sure I'm going to like it based on what you shared with us today. And if you start to write another one, let us know.
Will do. Thank you, Michelle. It was great to be here. Great conversation.
Tune in next week. Thank you for listening to Heart Inspired. I'm your host, Michelle Delgado. And don't forget to lean in, be heard, and be inspired.
This podcast was created by Hart Metrics Consulting, editing and co-produced by David Castle Productions, and co-distributed by Business Travel 360. For more information about Hart Metrics Consulting, visit us at hartmetrics.com.